would have already, sorry, some of you here would have filled out the survey. So huge thanks for doing that. And for anyone else keen on filling out the survey, we will be sending a link to that, I think, towards the end of the session. So there's space to fill that out if you're keen. And sort of a bit of background on this survey. The objective of the survey was to map which UK-based funders and other organizations are using participatory grant making and the approaches that they're using to their policies and practices as well. And so the findings from the survey aim to support organizations currently using or seeking to use PGM approaches to inform, and also to inform the National Lottery Community Fund's ongoing strategy renewal process as well, which I think Hannah touched on in the introduction. And so far our sense is that this is a really high energy group, which is wonderful. And there's so many people here who sound extremely passionate about the work that they're doing. But this is going to get a bit more technical for a second. So we'll just share some charts and graphs, but I think you're going to find this quite interesting. And we'll also dive into some of the qualitative data from the survey as well. If you have any questions as I go through the results, please feel free to pop that in the chat and we can get to that at the end of the presentation. And there'll also be time to share reflections and questions as well after the presentation if you prefer. So for the survey itself, so far we have 41 responses. So the data that we'll be showing today is based off of that, but that might change as we get more responses as well. And we got really great results. The majority of responses included some really comprehensive reflections and responses, and that certainly steered our research in the right direction. So again, huge thank you. And the main type of funder we got in terms of responses were charities or NGOs. There were also a few others who were listed, and those were community foundations, and a few were also not funders at all. So they were, that would have been the others. And the main issue areas or thematic areas that they were funding was young people, health, racial justice and inequality work, and poverty and social justice work as well. So those were some of the main areas. And we asked about a question about where in your organization you incorporate community participation. And for instance, participation from people and communities your funding seeks to benefit. So here, community participation was noted most in funding decisions and strategy development. And we also saw it in governance, for example, through boards and advisory groups. And we also saw it in monitoring, evaluation, and learning and research as well. So there was a bit of a split there. We saw it the least in procurement or finance, and only around 2% noted that it was not incorporated in any of these areas. This was an area we were quite interested in, so there will be an exercise later that will delve a bit further into this as well, which will be interesting. And in terms of models, so based on the work done by Hannah and others, we put a list of different types of models of participation of PGM. And as you can see on the screen, the one that was cited the most were representative boards and community boards. And there was also quite a high amount for onward granting and flow funding as well. And here, respondents who chose other either wanted to note their own approaches in more detail, or they were at the early stages of developing their own PGM approaches and models, and that's why they chose other. And in terms of geographical distribution, most were seen in England or generally UK-wide, and there was a significant amount of focus on London, particularly boroughs in London as well. That seemed to be quite a big area of focus for many organizations. And the vast majority of grant sizes were considered relatively small. So between £1,000 and £50,000, that was the most. And some were medium, between £50,000 and £300,000. And there might be some alignment here with some of the views expressed in the survey about where some respondents were feeling a sense that PGM is perceived all right for smaller amounts, but riskier for larger amounts of funding. But this could also just be because, as we'll see later on, most respondents were in the earlier stages of their PGM journey, so that could have been why as well. And funding through participatory grant making was relatively low, with most standing between 10% and 25%, and a slight bit between 25 and 50% as well. But it's worth noting that there was also around 15% who noted that all of their funding was to PGM, which is interesting. And as I was mentioning before, in terms of where organizations are in their PGM journey generally, the majority either were in their first year or have been practicing PGM for about 2 to 5 years now, so still relatively early on. And interestingly, the majority of respondents were actually expect that their share of PGM funding will be larger in the next 3 years compared to the last 3 years. So there will be scope for these percentages of funding to increase in the near future based off what respondents were saying as well, which is positive. And in terms of the qualitative data, we asked respondents what the main benefits were from doing PGM or what they've noted. And we sort of found 4 broader themes within the responses for this, which we thought were interesting. So the first one on the organization side was internal reflecting and learning. So many respondents cited gaining a better understanding of the communities they work with and the barriers they face, particularly with effective participation and decision making. They also noted it enabled funders to reflect and learn with members of local communities and to better understand their needs and interests as well. It was also noted as a great way to fund the most radical work that often struggles to get the most funding. So that was one area we noted. Another one, again, on the organization side was PGM was credited in changing the approaches to work or their work, with more voices integrated into various decision-making structures and processes. So it allows for more skill development and building, for instance, particularly around decision-making. There were notes about changes in approaches to panels, which allow for more interesting conversations with trustees about their roles of power and role, opportunities for funded groups to become members of the organizations or being able to actively contribute to future funding rounds. So that was interesting. And as a result, you get new approaches like match crowdfunding, more responsive strategies that are nuanced to the challenges and needs of affected communities, and also focus on lived experience, particularly at all stages of the grant making cycle. And it was also noted that it really helps push funders to think about their personality and their role within the space as well. And it really just this push to think deeper about your identity, who you really are as a funder, and how you manage this alongside day-to-day grant making. And I think even in the survey, there were questions about evolving the team approach and shifting internal culture by working outside usual frameworks that were sort of raised in relation to this as well. So really rethinking the approaches that organizations are taking to do their work. And then for communities, we saw that there were benefits there as well that were cited. So some of the main benefits were seen in its wider inclusion overall of voices and perspectives of those most versed in the issues and geographies in focus. So they get to bring their expertise and their unique understanding and community engagement practice. They gain sort of softer skills as well, like critical thinking, debating, and confident communication that's not always gained at education or employment. And they're also financially compensated for being a valued knowledge expert, which is great. And there are also paid opportunities to direct funding decisions and having access to unrestricted funds. And on a more local level, it was also noted as a helpful way for counselors to develop relationships with their constituents. And these can be both residents or organizations as well. And more broadly or sectorally, participatory grant making was also noted as contributing to longer term aims for devolving more funding and shifting power in the funding ecosystem. So respondents were noting that it helps remove barriers to groups applying for funding, and it brings grant making and grant funding to excluded communities. And it changes the narratives and perspectives of local people about what is possible, what can be done, what can be achieved, and it nurtures an overall more optimistic outlook as well. And it was also cited to help create an alternate ecosystem of support where all parties are learning. And this all results in a more equitable way of working with communities, and where they're more involved and more empowered, and organizations that are also not typically funded get funding. And there's overall also more impact because money is going where it really needs to. So those were some of the main benefits we've seen so far. So that was sort of a brief overview of the survey findings so far. And before we go into questions and reflections, Alex was there. Did you want to share the next slide? Yeah. So before we go into that, we just wanted to put up some questions for further reflections. So how do you know if funding is generally participatory? How do you know if an approach to PGM is diverse and inclusive? And what strategies would help to improve diversity within the PGM community and in PGM practices as well? So you can reflect on this and add that into the chat, and you can continue thinking about that as well, sort of throughout the day, and share with us later as well if anything comes up. But just wanted to pause there and ask if anyone had any questions on the survey or any reflections just off the initial findings. Anne?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you ask in the survey anything about challenges or stresses, or yeah, what organisations and well, not just organisations, but the process, but did people find challenges in the process?
We did ask if there were barriers that they faced, yeah, which I think there will be a session on as well later on. Yeah, but it was covered, yes. Georgina?
Hi there, hi, yeah. This, I think, came up from our breakout session as well, and it was just on definitions. And I can't remember if it was in the survey itself, because I did take the survey, but whether or not there was a sense of how people were defining PGM. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, we put a definition, I think, in the description of the survey. I don't think we asked people to define it for themselves, but I don't know if Alex, you wanted to jump in.
Indeed, exactly.
Yeah,
That's completely correct. And then in the qualitative, well, I think where we got a better sense of how people conceptualize PGM was in asking about the models, and then also in the qualitative section. So it became very apparent. And really, for those of you who filled it out, thank you so much. The qualitative, often with surveys, you get a lot of really great quant data and not a lot of qualitative data. But I think through the very detailed responses, we were able to glean from that either direct definition, so people would say, and by this I mean that, or just from the way they were elaborating on their PGM experiences, it became clear what they meant. And there is a diversity of definitions and understandings, but all within that, I think, within the umbrella of the definition we provided up front. Arisha, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Alex. And just to elaborate a bit on Anne's point on challenges, I think some of the main ones we were seeing were lack of understanding or reservations internally and externally. So there was a lot around decision making and governance structure, barriers within that. And also sort of resourcing, so financing it, the time that it takes, skills that it requires, that was also noted as certain challenges. And then organizationally or internally as well, people were facing challenges there in terms of organizational barriers and policies that were limiting the scope for PGM. Yeah. Are there any more questions or reflections on the survey? Great. If not, then it would be great to hear some thoughts on sort of the questions that I think Alex just popped in the chat, those reflective questions as well. And feel free to add that in the chat, or you can share as well if you'd like.
Maybe I can add that in the breakout group this morning, in response to this first question, how do you know funding is genuinely participatory? One of the responses, I won't name the person in case I don't have permission, was that they got the sense from the feelings of those people who participated, that it was about the energy, the feedback, what they got from the process, etc. So there are the systemic, maybe more hard indicators, but that how the people who were part of the process felt about the process was a very powerful indicator. So I thought I would add that in, but if the person responsible wants to say more, please do.
Sorry, I just had to step away. Can you hear me okay? I can't see myself again now. Yeah, just to add to that, we started interviewing people who'd been involved in the process, and they felt so strongly about the time and the space that they'd been given. They did a lot of work around cultural values and deep democracy, and they felt really invited into a world that they'd not been able to access, and then were allowed to create their own space. So following the initial invitation, the space was created by them. They were effectively, everything was handed over to them to make decisions about how they were going to design the funding, how they were going to find the people. They're just continually asking the right questions of themselves, because they've been, the conditions were created to enable them to do that. And they've got the confidence to do that. And the way that they challenge things, I think, is hugely healthy in comparison to other things I've seen where it's not been driven from the start by people with lived experience, where it's perhaps been a little bit more towards the bottom rungs of the ladder, particularly some of the NHS work that I've done. I think the caveat there is that it was a large private funder that was able to give them that space, so it wasn't, it wasn't done within any parameters that had already been set by, for example, the NHS or local authorities. So it's quite a unique example. How you recreate those conditions with some of the other constraints that you've got to work with, I'm not sure. Actually, that's the question I'm here to answer, I think.
Thanks, Ewan. Jack?
Hi, yeah, I can have a bit of reflection from these questions. I work for Barking Dagenham Giving. We're a place-based giving scheme in London, and I think we like to see participation as something that is continually kind of improving from your learning, capturing your learning, and keep harnessing that learning is why it becomes more participatory. And I think being 100% participatory is maybe impossible sometimes. And I think if you're even 1% more participatory than you were yesterday, I think that's a massive improvement in the way that you do participatory grant making. But learning from kind of what's gone wrong or what's gone right and listening to the community, I think that's when you kind of know that you're doing things in a participatory way.
Great point. Thanks, Jack. Is there anyone else? Danielle.
Hi everyone, I'm from Camden Giving. We're similar to Barking and Dagenham, and we are a place-based funder in the borough of Camden. And I think for us as well, it's about not just the people who participate in decisions, it's around how we're unlocking barriers to participation for grantees as well. And I think that dynamic of having citizens on our panel is really powerful in actually supporting the majority of our grantees who are sort of, grassroots, smaller organisations as well, who are often locked out of funding from, larger sort of funders as well. And just for us, that is such a positive experience that we've, heard from our grantees as well. We now bring our grantees and panelists together to do sort of coffee and chat participatory reporting, and that dynamic of bringing the decision makers who are ultimately benefiting as well from the services that they've funded within a space is something that we are learning a lot from, and it's a really interesting model of doing reporting differently as well, and taking the burden away from our grantees. And I think, yeah, sort of looking at both sides of, yeah, sort of our grantees and our panelists is really, yeah, something that we're learning and evolving from as well.
Great example. Thanks, Danielle. Anyone else? Georgia.
Thank you. Yeah, this all really resonates. So thank you so much for sharing. I just wanted to add on to that I was part of a piece of research last year, very specifically on child and youth participation, but I see a lot of similarities and a lot of alignment in the impact. And a couple of others we saw were actually how participation or participatory methodologies can strengthen collaborations across movements and across groups and networks. That continues after the participatory initiative or project has finished, and also with children and young people, kind of exposure to and insight into democratic processes and decision-making processes in that way, and many of whom then went on to be more active in their own democratic communities and societies. So really seeing sort of it be some of those impacts outside of the group or movement, but actually within a society as well. And then the other thing which I think is interesting is how it sparked participation in other. So maybe you started with participation in the strategy development process, and actually that led to participation in M&E or in grant making and funding practices. It actually had this ripple effect, which was pretty cool. So yeah, a lot of alignment with what you're finding as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Georgia. Paul.
Hi all. Just further reflections on everyone else really. With our equity fund, we're already a specialist funder, an LGBT specific funder, but then we've got a layering of that. So we've got 5 thematic intersectional areas where we have community panels, which has kind of been really, really interesting, because even with those community panels that are looking, for example, at deaf, disabled and neurodivergent LGBT plus people, it's not truly participative because we don't have all of lived experiences of deaf, disabled, neurodivergent people. So we're kind of like really going quite deep into how can we make this even more participatory in the future, which is really interesting. But it's also kind of not just involving them in the decision making. It was a co-produced fund, but also in terms of how we reach organizations, because the idea was we reach organizations we've never reached before, even us as a specialist funder. So the outreach, the comms, all those strategies were community-led as well, which has been interesting. And I've literally this morning just received our interim evaluation from our external evaluators, which has got some fascinating stuff, which I'm really, really happy to share once the lottery have approved it, because they are funding it. But yeah, I think that will have some really, really interesting learnings for other funders as well. So very happy to share that.
Thanks so much, Paul. I think that was everyone. Yeah. Should we move into the next exercise then, Lorianne?
Yes, that I think so. And Hannah, no pressure to say yes to sharing, allowing permission to share the report. But yes, let's move on. Thanks, everyone.
So for the next bit, I think there will be an option now to join one breakout room or to remain here. Just to know if everyone can see that. So we'll be having an activity in the main room, and then there will be one breakout room as well, that I think Alex will be moderating. And for that, will be for the next 45 minutes. Basically, there'll be a session here focused on the practical experiences of participatory grant making within an organization, so specifically focusing on governance and decision making. And if anyone here does not have direct experience of PGM within an organization, we invite you to join breakout group 1, where there will be a moderated session focused on sort of the barriers to PGM. So I think that option should be there now.
I've opened that. It should pop up as a choose your own. So if you do want to go into that group, you should be able to click it. If you want to stay in the breakout in this main room, don't click anything. if you want to click it and you're not quite sure and it's not popped up, just give me a shout and I'll assign you manually. Thanks, Emma.
And yeah, just to say, it may be that we all end up staying in the main room. I definitely won't take that personally, but Arisha will give all the explanation first. And if you think the main room sounds like your cup of tea, even if your organization isn't doing PGM, you're more than welcome to stay as well. Yeah. Back to you, Arisha. And I can share my screen now as well.
I was going to say that'd be helpful. Thank you.
We do have one person that's gone into that room.
Okay.
Nicola, if you can't see the breakout room, I can put you in it. Is that helpful? I can't see Nicola anywhere. Yeah, Nicola.
Yes, please. Yeah, yes, please, if you can.
Don't worry.
Thank you.
And then Ruba, would you like to go in that room as well?
Yes, please.
I'll pop you in there now.
Right, I'm going to join, so we're not leaving anyone completely on their own. So if someone else from the team could share screen on the mirror, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Lorianne, is it possible on yours? If not, I think I can pop a screenshot of the mirror as well.
Yeah, or people can just click the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, if everyone just goes into the link now, we can just talk through it.
Can you just remind me which room is which? Sorry, I missed that very important detail. Which one's the barriers and which one's the other one?
Barriers is breakout room, and this one will be PGM and organizations.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Can I also go to the breakout room in that case?
Yeah.
It should have popped up, but if it hasn't, let me know.
I've kind of just started, so I don't know where's best, but I'll join this one.
Okay.
Does everyone have a link to the mirror board?
Okay, I've just posted it again.
Thanks, Lorianne.
And so if we all just open it, then we can just give instructions from there.
Great. So what everyone will be looking at is the grid. I don't know if everyone can see that. Yeah. So as you saw from the presentation of the survey results, there was a question that we asked about where organizations incorporate community participation. So for example, this could be participation from people in communities that it seeks to benefit or to serve. And from there, we got a wide range of areas where participation is incorporated. So since this is a focus group, we thought this would be a great opportunity to sort of delve further into what this looks like. So we have 3 areas on the grid, and these were sort of areas where organizations cited participatory approaches as being particularly prevalent. And these were governance structures, so that could be boards and advisory groups. We were also told that participation factored into the development of strategies. So these could be internal organizational strategies or the development of funding priorities as well. And there was also decisions on how to allocate the grants. So today this is designed for us to sort of get insight into how this actually happens inside organizations. And then the purple square in the bottom right is for you to sort of include other areas that your organization is including participatory practices as well that may not fall into those other 3 categories. You don't have to fill absolutely everything in this grid, just what's relevant to your organization. And again, you can use the purple bottom right to sort of capture things that don't really fit in the other 3. And only fill your organization name if you would like to. And yeah, if we were to ever use any of these examples in the report, we will contact you first, so don't worry about that. But yeah, please let us know if you have any questions or if there's any issue with the mirror board. But yeah, I think we'll be taking about 15 minutes to sort of sit in silence and fill this out. So please fill away.
And maybe just to add 2 things. One is we'll take a break after the 15 minutes. And 2, what we'd like to do is, if you can see on the board, there's an example that has already been completed to give you a sense of the sorts of answers we envisaged. And then further down on the grid, we'd like people to complete one individual grid per organization. So I know traditionally on a Miro board, everybody's working on the same board, but actually within this session, we wanted to capture the examples from individual organizations. So if you could please select one, you can choose to remain anonymous or to add your organization's name. Both are fine, and yeah, it's complete one board.
Thanks, Gloria.
Okay, so why don't we look together at the governance section, and on the board, I have to say everyone completed the same board and a few people completed individual boards. That is all fine, all good, and just all part of the process. So we can make this work. So please don't worry. But maybe since most people, it seems, completed the same board on PGM practices, if we just go through that now. So we're on the pink square, where people have noted the current practices within their organizations in relation to governance, boards, advisory group, etc., and future plans. And I can see that there are clearly like lots of examples where community members are involved in board meetings, or the makeup of trustees and board and advisory groups have been designed to reflect people with lived experiences from the community. One question I'd love to explore is what steps, if any, organizations have taken to prepare to support participation on those board meetings and advisory groups, and are there occasions, examples, are there things that the board covers that's open to everyone and open to all? Or are some meetings, moments not open to everyone? Any thoughts on either of those questions?
I can jump in if you want, Lorraine.
That would be great. Thanks, Annie.
Just a couple of the things we have in place to support panelists, I suppose, and things we've had to sort of learn to think about along the way. So as a starting point, that everyone's paid for their time, but then for some people that pay doesn't sort of reflect what their cost would be to attend. So for example, if someone has childcare costs, so we'll also cover that. And that for some people, being paid might prevent challenges with their benefits and things like that, so that vouchers are an option. We provide food at every panel, recognizing that some people doing a session in the evening might mean they might miss the opportunity to cook dinner, or that they might be struggling financially outside of that, and having some food would be helpful anyway. Some things we do, so we can support with tech, and again, that's sort of, it's a case-by-case basis. We kind of ask at interview stage if people have sort of access to phones, laptops, dongles, that kind of thing. If people don't, we'll provide it. But beyond that, we have some people where they have challenges reading, be that due to eyesight, or be that due to literacy or dyslexia or anything like that. And we've got a couple of apps that we've learned along the way that can read and write for you. So Dragon Read and Write being one of them. And then cabs for those who need it, either due to concerns about their safety, sort of traveling home at night, or because of accessibility needs, like that. And something else I've had to think about, particularly with young people's panels, is because there is sort of tension between some young people, groups of young people in the borough, is finding sort of locations that are sensible. And if we have on the panel like referred to by our local like youth justice team, being aware of sort of who they might have conflict with in the borough, and not having two people from areas of the borough that might have some conflict on the same panel. Is that the kind of thing you were thinking about, Lorraine?
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the other side, have the meetings continued as they were, just with a wider group of people involved, or have you made any shifts in how they're run beyond those practical things that you've just talked through?
Yeah, so so when I started, I sort of started just after the pandemic, so I actually inherited virtual panels because things had moved virtually due to COVID. We then brought them back to face-to-face, but some of the people I sort of mentioned, sort of some of our mothers who might not have access, not any support with childcare needs and things like that, do still join virtually. So we do a couple of hybrid things. Although as the person that facilitates them, they are much harder to do hybrid than they are to do either face-to-face or virtual. Something about the childcare costs, actually, just to mention that we cover not just the time of attending the meeting, but the travel to and from, because obviously if you're having a childcarer, you'd need them to be there before you leave, and you need to guarantee you're there when not just when we finish, but the time to get home. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Anyone else want to come in? Either on the board or on any other part of the
I was just going to say about the sort of advisory governance stuff is and it was just following on what Daniel said about accessibility materials and reading, is giving people the time to read papers and information. And actually sometimes we present stuff that's written in our funder language, and also sometimes we produce a lot of paperwork which takes time for people to go through, and so having to think through what's actually how you structure papers, how you present information, is there other ways that we can do it, accessibility language. But we also pay people, like if we're paying people to make decisions and come to a decision-making panel, we pay people for the time they require to read as well. So yeah, so we'll say that maybe take you 2 or 3 hours and we'll pay them for that time as well.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you. Georgina.
Yeah, it was just to add actually to Elaine's point on accessibility. So for us, we're a charity for visually impaired. We fund projects that support visually impaired communities, and so it's just ensuring as well that, so we've got a committee that's made up all of visually impaired experts as well as trustees on our board. So that just the accessibility of the papers as well, giving enough time and ensuring that it's in an accessible format to be truly disability inclusive as well.
Thanks, Georgina. And I'm looking at some of the plans, the future plans. How, what's your sense of how ambitious the future plans are? Would you want to, do you feel like they're pitched at about the right level now, or would you want to see even more ambitious future plans?
But talking from ourselves, I think definitely for us it would be more ambitious plans. At the moment, we manage and deliver a range of funds and different programs, and so not all of them have got full participation, and not all of them have got participation element, and some have got participation elements. And our ambition is to think about how do we make everything more participatory, not just in our grant making practices, but across the board in terms of our thinking about our strategy, our structure of our board, how the board operates, all those kind of things in the investment strategy. And actually, when I did the survey and was responding to the selection options about where participation is involved in your grant making, I think there was lots of areas that probably we weren't even thinking about. So that was quite helpful for us to think, what else could we do?
Brilliant, thanks, Elaine. And Paul, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I want our future plans to be way more ambitious than they currently are. But the problem is that all of our funds are fund to fund, rather than having the structures of an LGBT plus fund in a wider context being funded. We have the feasibility for it, so we have all the evidence, what the structure will look like, but funding that is a nightmare. So we're having to spend all of our capacity building a fund at a time, which kind of creates this ebb and flow of when we can distribute funds. If it takes 2 years to build a fund, you're then starting to distribute one, which means it's taking your capacity away from finding the next one in the pipeline. That's been our challenge. So yeah, I would love for our future plans to be more ambitious, but we're limited by the capacity and the funding that we have available.
Can I jump in very quickly there? Because I can say this and Paul can't, but there are, like, on this call and generally across the space, so many amazing participatory funding organisations. And if you are starting out, or if you know of other funders that want to partner with some of the smaller or agile or identity-based funders who have got that capacity set up, that's an excellent way to be kind of trialing different ways of moving that money through. So if you are interested in those kinds of models, either kind of place-based or identity-based, do talk to the community of practice, because there's ways of linking up, or there's loads of people on this call that would be interested in and kind of collaborating around those spaces, and it helps just move that money, and so that Paul and others on the call don't have to spend so much time kind of fundraising to then redistribute. So do bear that in mind as a really good example of like sharing funding. All of the givings on the call, kind of Camden Giving, Barking and Dagenham, Islington Giving, are all also in a similar boat. There's probably loads of you, but just putting that out there because I can, that those partnerships are a really good way of doing this work.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Okay, and I think we're going to bring back now the group one who were looking at the barriers.
They will. I'm afraid the breakout room's on that funny thing where it gives them 60 seconds. So you've got 60 seconds to fill before they will come back.
Can I fill that with just picking up a comment from Paul about funding? So one of the things we're finding at the moment is, as Islington Giving, we raise money, and we've been raising money over the years for our resident-led giving, and we seem to have hit a little bit of a wall with other funders and what they can and can't fund in terms of what they class as re-granting, and that's going to prove a bit of a problem for us going forward unless we have other funders who are prepared to invest in us giving money to other people to give away. It is going to be a challenge, I think, going forward.
And it'll be interesting to hear from those of you who are fundraising to redistribute, whether as participatory grant-making becomes more commonplace and traditional funders are attempting to pivot their work, whether you therefore see a decrease in the amount that you're able to bring in because others feel that they're doing it themselves and aren't necessarily moving the money. And I think there's some really interesting tensions and nuances in participatory grant-making, across the globe, but particularly in the US, in the UK, around what do we mean when we say doing this well, and what does that look like? Is that about traditional funders changing their models and methods to become more participatory, or is it about them shifting money into those that can be in community, be in those spaces, do it well? Or is there a medium where actually there's distribution through many different means? So I suppose the question there that we probably need to have as a collective is that if you are a traditional funder who has, an endowment or sat on money that just replenishes itself, what does participatory grant making look like for you moving forward? Is that you delivering that completely by yourself, or are there ways that you can partner with some excellent funders and move money through different kind of PGM approaches? So not one size fits all, but how do we spread that resource and wealth to some of the really incredible funders across the space? Sorry, other breakout room, you caught the tail end of me musing.
Much welcome musings. Thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you everyone, for sticking with us and for all the inputs that went onto the Miro boards. They're so valuable and will be so useful as we are working on the final stages of the research. So huge thanks. So now I'll just hand over to Alex, who will take us through the final section.
Thank you so much. I've been taking a peek at what the other group did on the Miro board, and it looks very exciting. So just to wrap up, we wanted to do a couple of things. Number one, just a quick report back from each group, just to give you an overall summary. Then some next steps on how you can continue to participate on this research if you have the time and inclination. And then Hannah, we will give you the last word, but your last word can also be, no, I'm too sick. So I'm just warning you now, but if you would like to have the last word, we will make space if there's anything you want to say to the group before we wrap up. So Lorianne and Arisha, in kind of a minute or two, is there anything that sort of stood out from your exercise you just wanted to highlight, for particularly for the group that wasn't, that was with me?
I can go. We were such a big group and there are so many inputs onto the board that I don't think we can summarize it very quickly, but I was very struck by the diversity of the different ways in which people were involved, both in the governance and in decision making side, and also in our final square others, the extent to which PGM is been integrated across organizations, whether that's like M&E or research or theory of change development, etc. So I think our board will take there's so much here that it will take some time to kind of go through it and to put things into neat categories and to organize it into kind of research boxes. But there's obviously a real kind of a spectrum of activity at every level, and we were able in our discussion to hear some of the really tangible examples of the way, which links to yours, the way organizations are removing the barriers to participation.
Fantastic, thanks, Lorianne. Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into the grids. Arisha, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Lorianne covered that well, thanks.
Brilliant. Well, we only had one board, so I'm going to share the screen. You can also, of course, you all have access to this. But just as a quick summary, I think the starting point of our discussion was sort of an acknowledgement that resistance to PGM or barriers to PGM don't always come from a place of we don't believe in it or we don't care about it. Often there's a fear of what can go wrong, whether there's the right capacity, the right expertise, and potentially what could the unintended consequences be if you don't have either of those things in place already. And then in terms of the exercise we did, we started the grid with 3 of the most common barriers that were cited in the survey. So just to quickly recap those in case it's interesting, I know it came up earlier as well. There was this idea of fear of challenging the status quo within an organization if PGM isn't part of the fabric of how things work already. Then a general category around misalignments between funder and between community and funder views and or priorities, and how do you resolve those if they exist. Financial risks, this is, and I think also legal risks came up, procurement, due diligence, particularly if you work, say, for a governmental authority, there's a whole legal framework that is quite strict, sets of rules and regulations. And then we also had we made space for other categories. So just to kind of highlight a few, logistics being one, so the practicality of getting money from the organization's bank to an individual, not knowing what the best way to start is. And that can be quite difficult, say if you're an organization of 4 people and you have many priorities, or even if you're an organization of 500 people with a very long strategic plan, how do you build this in? And the reason I wanted to show this board as well is because obviously for everyone who was doing the other exercise, you didn't get a chance to write down what you see as barriers. So we're going to leave the Miro link open for a couple of days. Please make note of it now, but I think there might be a way for us to also email all the participants if you signed up with the link. But if not, do take a minute to save it now, and we'll leave this open. And so if you have an idea of a barrier that aligns, you think, with one of these columns, you can put them here. And then we've got loads of other, to be honest, break the rules, put it down in whichever way you would like it to be captured, so we can take a look at that. And then likewise for everyone who is in the barriers group, it's a great opportunity to take a look at what everybody in the other group did. I see I have a chat message as well. So I just want to, okay, yeah, we will come to that and take that on board. I just wanted to quickly share my screen again. We wanted the parting words to not come from us, but from people who filled out the survey. So we just highlighted a few quotes that we really stood out to us from the survey. So the first one is, funders value things that differ from what communities value, such as the value of building relationships and skills, and the value of investing in accessible and inclusive processes. And that captured a sentiment we heard a lot in the survey. The second quote says, PGM helps us as a funder to keep our finger on the pulse in an ever-changing environment. If we didn't work with community leaders and residents and enact on what's happening on the ground, we would likely become static and not serving our purpose. And finally, this quote really stood out to us. We wanted to highlight it in particular. It says, "In a world where injustice and inequality is so prevalent in our systems and society, we believe PGM is one of the most morally conscious, effective, and sustainable practices that will disrupt this narrative. These structures and systems are man-made. We build them and maintain them, but we can also dismantle them." I'll let that sit for a moment. Yeah, so that is everything we had for today. If you have any parting thoughts, I can see there's a message. I'm very bad at reading long messages and facilitating at the same time. Daniel, I will absolutely read your message. But if anyone else wants to put something in the chat, any parting words, we will also make sure that we give you a way to contact us. So actually, if someone from our team could put a contact email address from our side, please, that would be fantastic. Thanks, Hannah. Link to future PGM community events. If you're not already signed up, I think most of you are, but if you're not already signed up to the PGM Google group, there's lots of emails that come through that. There's also a Slack channel if that's more your cup of tea. But that covers all the content that we had from our side. So just from me and from our team, a huge thank you for being so generous with your participation. This is inherently an exercise where we're taking information from you, but we do want our best to give back. So everybody who's been here today will receive a copy of all of the data, and of the report that we're making public. We've got the link to the survey if you haven't completed it yet, or if you have a friend who you think would be perfect for this, please do send it to them. That's it from me.